Pit Talk, brought to you by Shannon's.
Cars are our passion. Building, restoring, or modifying. It's about making it our own. It's an obsession. Shannon's know what it's worth. That's why the agreed value includes all your modifications. Get a quote online today.
This is the moment then that we've all been waiting for.
4 in a row, Max.
Here comes Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris.
They are playing hardball out there at the moment.
The pivotal moment of 2024.
Hello and welcome to Pit Talk, brought to you by Shannon's. On this week's episode, Oscar Piastri claims a comprehensive victory at the Bahrain Grand Prix to get 3 points within the championship lead. And on, let's be honest, pretty hectic week of motorsport, we're going to be checking in with the Qatar Motorcycle Grand Prix and over in Topor, the Supercars round. My name's Michael Lamonato. It's great to have your company and the company of my co-host. I know he missed out on hearing this over the course of the weekend, so I'll do it. Thank you ever so much for getting up for this podcast, Matt Clayton.
I'm not sure I've been to bed to get up, but it's definitely been one of those weekends where everywhere you look, there's something going around a track somewhere. But can't have too much of that, can you?
Yeah, well, this weekend might have found
Probably.
you could probably get pretty close to having too much of that because we were operating in virtually every time zone around the clock. Matt, you haven't been to bed yet, but we're gonna soldier on.
We are.
Thanks not only for getting up, but staying up, I suppose. Let's start.
Perpetuity.
Yes, with the Bahrain Grand Prix. Round 4 of the championship, Oscar Piastri won. That's his second Grand Prix victory of this season. Now just 3 points off the championship lead. The leader continues to be Lando Norris. Had Norris not finished on the podium, we'll talk about this as we go through this, he would have taken the championship lead. First Australian driver, we're preempting this a little bit, he would have been the first Australian driver since Mark Webber in 2010 to lead the championship. This felt like, it felt very similar to his Chinese Grand Prix win in many respects. Led from pole, no one seemed to bother him very much throughout the race. Very straightforward victory, very Oscar Piastri victory. But this one, in the context of how Lando Norris performed on the same weekend, seemed to carry a little bit more meaning, certainly if you read into Norris's response.
Yeah, I thought it was actually more emphatic than China, simply because China, there was that spectre of, well, is Lando going to catch up in the final stint? What's going on with his brakes? Is there a possibility of a late race charge here? This was never in doubt, and it was never in doubt twice because we had the inverted commas Hollywood safety car towards the end of the race to make things interesting when there was some debris on track, and that brought the field back into contention after Oscar had pretty much left everybody for dead in that first couple of stints. And you thought, well, perhaps there's some jeopardy here for him, and then very calmly just drove away and continued on his merry way. And the whole weekend, from qualifying and how unflustered he was and right the way through the race, just outstanding from start to finish. He's not had a race win like this, and I don't think it's going to be the last time we see this, because you can just see the confidence and I think the calmness with Piastri at the moment. He knows he can do this, he knows he's got the machinery, he knows he belongs, and now it's just a matter of methodically executing that. And I just thought it was a completely flawless weekend.
There's been this interesting element as well with Oscar this season. I know we're only 4 rounds in, and this is what anyone who's asked, I've emphasised 4 Grand Prix isn't enough in a 24 Grand Prix season to make any conclusions. But it's interesting that in this sample size we had, I know we're going back a bit here, but Australia and China in particular, Bahrain's a bit of an outlier because McLaren's always been quite bad here. It hasn't been an Oscar Piastri thing, but nonetheless, we've seen a lot of races where Oscar hasn't had great results in the last couple of years of his career. And he's turned up this season, has been really quite good at all. Well, he's been quite good at all Grand Prix. I think you can even mount an argument that he's been the fastest race driver so far this season, even he hasn't won all of the races. That step we talked about during the off-season about what he needed to become potentially a world championship contender. It feels a lot like at this stage it's been made.
It feels like it's happened very quickly too. Like you look at some of the rough edges that he's ironed out over the past couple of years. He had the big qualifying deficit last year to Norris. It was 20-4, and that's emphatic in Norris's favour. But he seems to have addressed that very, very quickly, and there's less of those little mistakes in qualifying. We know that he cleaned up a lot of his tyre management last year, so he's much more proficient at that. He is the very definition of a fast learner. And you can see the change in him just in 4 Grand Prix weekends this year. I think the most surprising thing to me is it looks totally unsurprising that he's a front runner and he looks so assured. It's happened super fast. And, we're 4 rounds into a 24-round season. This looks A, legitimate, and B, like it has staying power. And, you don't want to get too far ahead of yourselves here because, he's still off the championship lead. But this looks like a championship push that can sustain the whole way through. Now, if McLaren continues with this car advantage that they've got at the moment, and you would expect in the final year of a rule set, you quite often see these baked-in advantages carry on for longer in a season because the other teams turn the development tap off and they look towards 2026. So if we have a fairly standard season like we've had when we've had these really big rule changes in the past, I think 2013 is the one for me, when Red Bull were dominant, everyone else looked at 2014, Sebastian Vettel wiped the floor with everybody at the end of 2013. This has got that McLaren feel about it, other than extenuating circumstances like a bit of rain or Max Verstappen at Suzuka. So, you know, you're looking at the possibility of two guys fighting for the world title. I'm not sure I was ready to say Piastri was ready to win that this time last year. He looks completely legit to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that step change, because we talked about at the beginning of last year, and it was a little bit easier to say because it was his rookie season and of course he's going to make progress, but that trajectory that McLaren talks a lot about just feels completely uninterrupted at this point. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops over the course of the season, because he continues to get better, and that's the sort of interesting element of this. We talked about this, or we joked about this on the podcast during the week, which you can go and find at the Fox Sports website or wherever you get your favourite podcasts, that, you know, Christian Horner said after the Japanese Grand Prix, which Max Verstappen won, that McLaren's problem was having two competitive drivers, and it's made its bed and must lay in it now. I think was his phrase. And, you know, in a weird way, there's this tiny little shred of logic that you can kind of take out of that, which is that for the Drivers' Championship perspective, well, Lando and Oscar both going to be taking points of each other, but Max is just going to be the only driver on his behalf when Red Bull Racing is competitive winning those points. I kind of get that element. But the other part of this is that McLaren's always there, and, for example, Red Bull Racing wasn't this weekend, and Mercedes is always the second fastest, but I haven't got the sense yet that they're a car that could win a race. They can finish second a lot, but not there, and Ferrari's Ferrari, maybe later on in the year. But so it does feel like, regardless of whether Lando and Oscar are competing with one another, they've got enough clear air to score points for themselves and be okay. So I want to talk about Lando Norris here, because he was the missing element in this. In China, as you said earlier, there were these circumstances that meant, okay, he was never comfortable with that track, but he was kind of competitive enough, and at the end of the race, maybe he was thereabouts with those brake problems. There was no sense this weekend that Lando was on Oscar's pace. This was Oscar's weekend, not just McLaren's weekend, let's say it like that. And really quite despondent. A significant amount of despondency, I think, is the only word I can think of that really sums it up so clearly for Lando, especially after qualifying. I mean, we see he's fond of a bit of self-flagellation, I think, when he does not do too well. We got a lot of that after qualifying, and even after the race, recovering to the podium, saying, well, I should have finished at least second and I finished third, and that's disappointing. That's part of his game, isn't it? This sort of intense self-criticism. But does it reveal, do you think, a little bit about where the dynamic in this potential championship battle is going to play out?
Well, I think particularly if you contrast the way that Oscar goes about his racing, where there's minimal radio chatter and it's very flat line, it's not super peaky, good or bad. He just wants information, doesn't say a whole lot, very reserved. This is a man that's in control and he has complete belief in what he's doing, and if he has some vulnerabilities, he's not willing to share them. Yeah. And I think that's something that he can seize upon. Now, there could be a cultural thing here or personalities, but the way Norris reacts to adversity, to me, I think you can perhaps... Look, I appreciate the honesty, and I think every Formula One driver goes through these periods of doubt like this, but you can get away with this in a championship where the other protagonists in the championship are not just within your own team. If you've got a deeper championship field and you're spreading this around, there's different guys that are winning races and they're not you, then perhaps you can get away with this. But when the person that is most likely to capitalise on your worst days is your teammate in the same car, in the same team, I don't know whether you should be showing all of your cards here, because I think it's an area that Piastri can really chip away at, because you know that psychologically Lando can get very, very down on himself. And I just think the dynamic of this is going to be super interesting, because Piastri is managed by Mark Webber, and one of Mark Webber's sayings was, you know, I am giving nothing. He would give you absolutely nothing, except for the odd F-bomb in a radio message, which Piastri is not going to do. Piastri is going to show Norris absolutely no vulnerability psychologically. And this strikes me as a championship that could be won as much between the ears as between the white lines. I think there's a lot going on with these two different personalities here. and the way Piastri's working it, I think he sees that he's got something here that he can use to his advantage.
I think it's really interesting in the post-race press conference. Obviously, both drivers were asked, well, why is the car working for you, Oscar, and not Lando? And Lando doesn't have any answers at this moment. I'm sure he's got some ideas and he's not going to give them all away. But he did say he was really just confounded by the fact he can't take this car to the limit like he could last year's car. McLaren has talked about the fact it's made some compromises on drivability to try and take a step forward. And then Oscar was asked the question, well, what's going on with you? Are you finding these struggles with the car? And he said, no, the car feels great. I'm getting a lot of pace out of it. It seems like it's working fine for me. And I don't think he was stirring the pot in any deliberate way because it's not really Oscar's style. But the contrast there was stark. And if you're Lando there sitting there, and you're obviously hearing in the debrief as well in the team because Oscar's not giving any negative feedback about the car, presumably, or nothing as dire as Lando's would be, you're starting to think, well, why can't I get that out of the car? And it's certainly nowhere near as significant as, for example, Lewis Hamilton's current grappling with the Ferrari in this transition, or if you want to go back to even Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren against Lando Norris, because Norris is still finishing on the podium and still pole contender and all that kind of thing. But there's just that little element of, well, why can't I do that?
And I think the interesting part for me is if you role reverse, and this will happen with this car this year because it clearly is the class of the field, there will be a weekend where Norris does to Piastri what Piastri did to Norris this weekend in Bahrain. How Oscar responds to that, I don't think he's going to give as much away. He's not going to be as raw and exposed in that he'll take his medicine and he'll say, look, there's plenty of learnings to come and so on, but there'll be a lot more measured, a lot more reserved. He's not going to leave any low-hanging fruit out there that could be seized upon, because if this shakes out the way we think it's going to shake out, psychologically this championship takes a different turn, perhaps after mid-season, if everyone else is buttoned off and they're looking at 2026. If this is a head-to-head battle and you look at, Norris as the homegrown protege within McLaren, and Piastri's come in after he squirmed his way out of the Alpine deal. If he comes in and sort of beats the guy that they've raised since he was 17 years old in a head-to-head World Championship fight, now they have a car to do it. It'll be so interesting from a mental perspective as this season goes on.
Something that we'll be watching before we move on for the next couple of races as well is that I felt like there was a little bit of a dynamic shift this weekend. Not the internal power of McLaren, because I don't really believe there's any big changes in the way they're approaching things. They're going to be even-handed. Lando Norris, as we've said, still an extremely quick driver. This is one race we're talking about as well. He could win the next 4 races. We're having a completely different discussion. But so much of this season was about, well, how's Lando going to beat Max Verstappen to the championship? That was the rivalry that we saw at the end of last season. We've got a little bit of glimpse of that this year. I mean, in Japan, obviously, Max was on form, and in Australia as well, he was challenging for victory. But I think this weekend emphasised that Red Bull Racing still has some pretty significant problems to overcome. And suddenly, I wonder how much Lando's thinking, well, Oscar's not just going to be here winning like every 3 or 4 races. Like last year, he was often in contention, but maybe not absolutely sealing the deal. And it's Max is the guy who's going to be winning the races. Now I wonder how much is an adjustment to think, well, actually, it's the guy in the other garage now that I really need to be thinking about, because Max may not come good. Red Bull Racing may not come good. They're hinging. It feels like they're hanging a lot on this rule reinterpretation of the Spanish Grand Prix about front wings. McLaren's adamant nothing's going to change, just like it didn't with the rear wings a couple of rounds ago. It really could just be between the two of them, and that is an approach shift.
It's almost easier to focus on your main opponent if they're not wearing the same overalls as you. It's very much an us versus them. When it's us versus us, that's a really different dynamic, because then there's a degree of paranoia that starts to creep in too. Like, is he getting the new parts before me? Is he getting a better strategy than me? Why is he getting the undercut? Why am I not? What's happening in engineering briefings? Are they keeping stuff back? There's all that level of paranoia, because you know how the team operates internally. Whereas if it's Norris versus Verstappen, like Lando has no idea what goes on within the walls of Red Bull and how to operate. Sometimes it's easier to fight someone when you don't know necessarily what they're doing, because there's that degree of a lack of knowledge. They're just the guy in the other team I need to beat. When it's within your own team, it's a very different dynamic.
When you don't know what they're doing, and when, more importantly, you know they don't know what you're doing. So that's part of the reason as well.
Couldn't have said that better myself.
Yeah, I'm sure you could have found a way. Let's move on now to Move of the Week by Shannon's. Now, unlike last week, or the week before, when there wasn't a lot going on, of course, in the world of motorsport, we had no shortage of options. Plenty of racing action over 3 different disciplines this weekend. What caught your eye over the non-stop 24 hours, 7 days a week of racing?
Yes, I can't remember a time where there was no racing. I'm going to go 2 wheels here, MotoGP. we had a situation that was so shocking that even Marc Marquez didn't know what was going on because he was passed for second place by a KTM on lap 10 of the Qatar Grand Prix on Sunday. And quite rightly, he thought that KTM is probably Pedro Acosta, given that Acosta is usually the guy getting most out of the KTM. To his great surprise, he realised it was Maverick Viñales, who we've not seen or heard from the entire season. And Viñales was just on one of his, I'm going to be, Maverick and Mercurial at the same time.
Yeah.
Put an incredible move on Marc to get to second place and then took the lead of the Qatar Grand Prix. And afterwards, Marquez was like, well, I got passed by KTM, that was interesting. And then I was shocked that it was him. And this is what happens with Maverick Viñales. Once or twice a year, he looks like the best rider in MotoGP. And then you'll look at the classification and realise that he is 18th. So, it's always the good and the bad, nothing in between. But that was my move of the week. A, because it was very audacious, and B, it was very surprising.
Yeah, and we will get back to Maverick Viñales a little bit later on as well. I'm going with Formula One very early on in the Bahrain Grand Prix. Wasn't a battle for the lead. In fact, it was a battle for drivers who finished way off the podium, but it was between Lewis Hamilton and Carlos Sainz. A nice long-running battle from the start all the way through to the middle sector. Didn't all rely on DRS, which as much as we enjoyed the action in Bahrain, let's be honest, a lot of it was just DRS initiated. And of course, there's the poignancy of this, isn't it? It is a significance.
Yes.
That Carlos Sainz is driving a car that he's struggling with at the moment. This is sort of a little bit of an untold story so far this season that maybe we'll get to once we get to Europe. But not having a great time in the Williams. This weekend looked a little bit better. And likewise, Lewis Hamilton, not having the best of times at Ferrari. In fact, I feel like it's in the last week that reality's hit him a little bit. You can see in his body language. And there they were scrapping for sort of middling points. Would have been significant for Carlos, obviously, but for Lewis Hamilton, it's still like, well, what am I doing here? And Carlos put up a fight. Like, he argued the position here, knowing that his car wasn't going to be able to do it. And in the end, Carlos eventually retired from this race, and Lewis Hamilton kind of finished middling in the middle of the points. But I love it when drivers who find themselves in these kind of situations find themselves on track, because inevitably there's that little bit of extra significance.
And isn't it funny when you can see the body language of a car in a fight as well, which sounds like a ridiculous thing to say about a car, but you could see that if Sainz's car had elbows, they were out. I love the fact that he just fought his corner in an inferior machine so stridently, because it's like, hang on, you're driving the car I used to drive, so you can have some of this for the time being. It was very good fun. Nice choice.
Yeah, it was one of the many great passages of racing from the Bahrain Grand Prix. That was Move of the Week, thanks to Shannon's. Matt, let's move on to one of my favourite segments of this video podcast, Interested versus Expert.
Ooh.
Many motorsport disciplines, of course, covered on the Fox Sports website. We, between us, cover all three of them. This week, though, I'm interested in MotoGP. Right. Interested mostly because of the time zone meant I was watching it all on replay. Obviously, I wasn't watching it live.
Yes.
But a great race in Qatar overnight, or depending on when you're listening to this, overnight, during the day. If you're in Perth, maybe it's still technically at night. I'm not sure exactly how the time zone's converted. But I want to start with, I think, the biggest takeaway from this race, which was Jorge Martin's return, and now pretty hasty return to hospital. Really quite injured in a significant crash. Had a reasonable start, I guess, to the weekend in that he finished the sprint, but couldn't finish the race.
He has encountered a black cat and walked beneath a ladder and done every possible thing you could be to be unlucky. We know that he had a big crash in pre-season testing in Malaysia. He had the motocross accident where he broke his left wrist. He was back this weekend and then had a fall in the Grand Prix and was hit by Fabio Di Giannantonio. And they've reassessed Monday night Australian time the extent to Martin's injury. It looks like he has 8 broken ribs and a punctured lung. He's not been able to leave Qatar. He's still in the hospital there. One of those accidents that when you see it in the moment and you know the consequences of bikes hitting riders prone across the track, you do sit up that little bit straighter. So we're very, very thankful that it's no worse than 8 broken ribs and a punctured lung, as much as that sounds terrible to say. Incredibly unlucky, but incredibly lucky at the same time. And I think you only had to see Fabio Di Giannantonio's face after the race when he realised what he had done. There was still 8 or 9 laps to go in that race. He's riding around afterwards saying, I'm looking at the big screens to see how he's being treated because I don't know if he's okay, because I know that I hit him. And the mental toll that takes on a rider. But for Martin, I mean, it's just been an absolute nightmare since he's come to Aprilia. He's done one Grand Prix weekend. He's injured again. This season is a complete write-off. It was probably before he came to Qatar. He's not on a Ducati, so he's not going to win. Ducati win everything. But at this point, I think his health and safety and the longevity of that contract with Aprilia is far more important. So we're thankful that he's okay, but my goodness, he is just so unlucky at the moment.
Yeah, a bit of blow as well, because it felt like he'd timed his comeback relatively responsibly in the context of MotoGP.
As far as MotoGP goes, I think he was hoping to get through this weekend unscathed. The following race is at Jerez in Spain, and there is a one-day test after that race, so he missed basically all the pre-season testing. He just needs to do laps on that RSGP and get used to it, get used to the team, speak the common language with them. He's effectively at base camp of pre-season, and we're 4 rounds into the season. So that's why I said I think the rest of the season is really longer lens, 26, rule change for 27, what happens after that. But just shocking luck for him, but we're glad he's okay.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the winner of this race, M. Marquez, is that right? Have I read that correctly?
Might have heard of him, might have seen that name before. For those counting at home, that's 7 wins from 8 starts this year. And the one that he didn't win, he crashed from at the lead in Texas, as he is wont to do. But the thing I'm loving about what Mark's doing this year is old Mark would go out there on the best bike, or not the best bike if he was riding a Honda, and try and pulverise everybody with pace and risk-taking. It's just maybe a bit of age and the fact he's come back from so many injuries. He's riding super smart this year in that there's, yes, I'm qualifying on pole. I'm not going out there as the hare at the start of these races. Franco Morbidelli took the lead at the start of this race and led for probably the first half of it. And Mark was like, well, you're going to burn your tyres up, so that's fine. I'll just sit here and wait for you to kill your tyres, and then I'll come past. Then we had the aforementioned Vinales cameo, which kind of came from nowhere.
Yeah.
But again, Mark was like, I'm saving my tyre, I'm waiting for my chance. 6 laps to go, takes the lead, sets a fastest lap, sets another fastest lap. Vinales has got nothing. Pecco Bagnaia has chewed his tyres up because he's come back from the 4th row of the grid because he crashed in qualifying. His charge petered out, and then Mark just canters to another victory. So he's riding the best bike on the grid, and he's riding it faster than everybody else. He's also riding it smarter than everybody else. And I think this is the evolution of a rider that is now, he's got the belief back that he lost, I think, from being injured for so long. He's managed to work his way in very Machiavellian Marquez style into the best team in the sport. And he's now making up for lost time. But he's not the same Marc Marquez that won those 6 titles in 7 years between 13 and 19. I think he's a different, better version because he's got the wisdom and the racecraft to go with the speed. Just an absolutely outstanding performance.
Alarming that there's a better version of it. That we found a bit concerning. And just very briefly, we talked about Maverick Vinales. Didn't end up winning the race, but in fact was penalised after the race for this tyre pressures issue that continues almost after every race at this point. I understand why tyre pressure issues are in MotoGP, the aerodynamics of the sport at the moment, but it's not a sustainable way to regulate the sport, is it? When we have drivers that are handed these significant penalties just because they unexpectedly were quick on race day.
I mean, and look, this is part of the reason that when these rules change with all the aero packages coming off these bikes in a couple of years, you're not going to have this as a problem anymore. 16-second time penalty, which pushed Vinales down from a very, very surprise and very well-earned podium in 2nd place to 14th, which is where Maverick Vinales can be found on most classifications at the end of most Grand Prix. But it is a difficult situation because you have got teams playing with tyre pressures based on where they think they're going to be running during the race. It's not a great way to go racing. I understand why the rule's in there because it needs to be in there for safety reasons. Teams are running these tyres virtually flat because if you sit behind another rival in dirty air, your tyre pressure spikes. So you want to run them as low as possible. There is a safety element to this that I understand, but there's nothing like a post-race investigation and then you get the final ruling and the complete change of the results and everything else at about 5 o'clock Australian time in the morning. So it was the double whammy of here's the 90-minute wait and you can have it at 5 a.m. So good times all around. But funnily enough, Vinales didn't seem that disappointed because he's like, well, I had a lot of fun. I was really fast. It's been really bad for KTM this year, so all good. And I think he was going to ask for his podium bonus. Yeah. So as long as he'll check his internet banking in the morning, and he might be happy.
So he should. Well, I was very interested. I enjoyed it.
So if we're going to go with this interested versus expert theme here, we know, you mentioned that Supercars were in New Zealand over the course of the weekend, but there was something that happened in the lead up to that I found particularly interesting. Perhaps you can fill in the blanks with this homologation story.
Yeah, one of the great motorsport words, homologation, I think.
I even pronounced it properly.
You did. It's in my auto spell check in the computer, which had to be updated, obviously, to spell it as frequently as you need to in Supercars. This is the General Motors homologation team. Obviously, winding back a little bit earlier in the season's 888, who has filled that role for many years now, but is defecting to Ford to replace DJR as the homologation team there. And the search has been on for General Motors to replace them. But of course, of the GM teams remaining, there aren't any powerhouses like Triple Eight, and this is the problem, because we found with the advent of Gen 3, and while the rules are not changing anytime soon, we do have Toyota coming next year, and there may be some work involved in prioritising the cars at that point. It is a lot of work. DJR has struggled under the weight of being the Ford homologation team, a regular powerhouse team that hasn't been able to convert results. So it's been a really interesting search in that regard. There were some rumours, or maybe they'll poach someone. They ended up doing that, but they've chosen Team 18, Charlie Schwerkolt's team based in Mount Waverley in Melbourne. Not a massive team, but a team that has bigger aspirations, a race-winning team at least. But the approach they're taking is a little bit different, and I think this is interesting in the long term of the sport, I suppose, which is essentially General Motors is taking it in-house now. There isn't... Team 18 is not going to be the traditional homologation team that does the work and then kind of gets ticked off by GM or in association with GM, whatever, however you want to describe that. It seems like, particularly because General Motors has been able to take the Triple Eight technical director, former technical director Jeremy Moore, now in-house, in an in-house role, still to be defined after some gardening leave, they're kind of just going to be designing these race cars themselves in-house. Team 18 as the conduit, obviously, is the most responsible team, I guess, if you like, in the field. The one representing General Motors. It is still a big honour and responsibility for them. I don't want to downplay that at all. But it does seem to be a bit of a shift whereby, and General Motors acknowledged this as well, it's going to be a collaborative effort, a word they've used quite a bit over the last couple of weeks in the lead-up and during the announcement, between all the GM teams. Are going to be collecting a lot of data together and then into a central data bank, I guess, if you like. And it is interesting because it is a different approach. And you wonder, in the last couple of years debating about how GM is committed to the sport, is it different to the way Ford's committed to the sport? It is just a different take on it. I mean, it's maybe the right time to do it because there shouldn't be any significant changes over the next few years short of General Motors' highly secretive transition to whatever's replacing the Camaro, because the Camaro is now essentially extinct. They won't say when that's going to be. It's at least a couple of years away because it'll go through NASCAR first before it ends up in Supercars. So there is work on the horizon. But for now, keeping cards close to the chest, essentially, it could end up paying off, particularly in this era where parity is so tight and always an argument in supercars. So an interesting twist there. And then the second element here, when we're considering the GM teams, is, of course, this manufacturer shuffle. Now, we know Toyota's got WAU. That is their homologation team. Love using the word. Next year. Said it again. I get a little bit of money every time I say I wish. They're looking for their next team. And then, of course, there's a general shuffle going on. And the talk is Premier, of course, wanted to be the GM homologation team. And there's been a rumour going around that might, now having not got that role, maybe they'll be considering their options elsewhere. Of course, they're really closely associated with Triple Eight. They've been buying the cars directly from them. They're based in Queensland to be close to Triple Eight. Will they move to the Ford camp? And Brad Jones Racing as well. They're 4-car entries. That would be a really big blow to this idea of General Motors wanting this collaborative, everyone involved, all data gathered effort. Could defect perhaps to Toyota. These are all rumours and everyone's sort of keeping their cards close to their chest. But that could be quite a big blow because if this whole saga has highlighted anything for GM, it's that there was a lot of reliance on Triple Eight. There's now a real shoring up of the position for them. They've got a lot of really great independent teams there. I say this not to down-talk any of their efforts. We've seen them win races, again, podiums, all that kind of thing. But there's an important restructure happening there, and it's not complete just because the homologation team's been decided. Like I say, teams could yet be shifting. And that's still to be seen. But I thought that was a big talking point in New Zealand. Of course, a big talking point as well is that Matt Payne won the Jim Richards Trophy over there by winning the round. 2 race wins. It's rare you get a home win in supercars unless you're talking about state by state. So I thought that was really good. The New Zealand fans are so enthusiastic. We see that. It's a bit of a New Zealand moment, I feel like, even in international motorsport.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's nothing like a home winner, right?
Yeah.
And to win it in the style that he did.
Yes.
I think it was, I don't think too many people left that circuit unhappy on Sunday, did they?
No. And it's great, because obviously in the post-Shane Van Gisbergen era where they'd go over there and be like, well, he'll probably win.
Yes.
Now, at least, it's good to see this, and such a big and talented generation of Kiwis as well, racing in the supercars. And the rumour is, of course, we'll have a second race over there maybe as soon as next year, so no one will be too disappointed by that. Matt, before we wrap this one up, though, it's time for the crystal ball. One of the great segments, of course, brought to you by Complete Home Filtration. You can pick whatever discipline you like, whatever time frame you like, to predict what's going to happen before our next episode, or during the next episode if you're bold.
My crystal ball is in for a service because it's been absolutely rubbish the last couple of weeks. For those, I'm going to fess up to the fact that I had Kimi Antonelli on the podium.
Yes.
Bahrain didn't score a point, so it's almost like the kiss of death rather than the crystal ball. But Let's hope that I actually have my crystal ball right. I'm saying that, well, Oscar Piastri won 2 Grand Prix last year. He's won 2 Grand Prix this year. I think he's going to win in Jeddah.
Oh.
And I think he's going to take the lead of the World Championship for the first time, and the first time for an Australian, as you said, in 15 years. So that's my crystal ball for this coming week's motorsport. But what's in yours?
Where do you get a crystal ball service?
Excellent question. We need a sponsor for that. That's very clear.
Crystal Ball Servicing. I know you're out
.com,
there.
yes.
Please come. We're happy to have a supplementary sponsor for this segment. I like that because I was thinking on a similar line because Oscar does very well in Jeddah.
And that's part of my thinking.
Yeah, Tracky's done well. Even in his debut year, even in Formula 2, he's always done very well at this insane circuit. So I like that one a lot. I have been on the Jack Doohan bandwagon for a little while now. I predicted, if we're going back to visit our predictions, that he was going to score his first points this weekend.
You were closer than me.
I felt like I was close. Before the safety car, it actually came in my head. I was like, oh, it's 2:30 in the morning.
You were ready for your victory lap.
I was very ready, but I'm going to double down. I'm going to say these are going to be his points. He knows this track from Formula 2, of course. He's competed here before. If memory serves, but memory may not serve, this may have been his first Formula 2 race when he got that jump up from F3.
You are correct.
And I believe he qualified second.
Yeah, he was on the front row.
Behind Oscar Piastri.
Very good. All Australian front row.
One of the great front rows. So I think this could be finally his points chance because this is a big race for him. This is where the rumour was going to be that it was going to be his last race. I don't think it's going to be his last race.
I don't either.
But nonetheless, it'll be a great opportunity to just say, well, the doubters can be quiet for a little bit because he's going to finally get his points. The speed's been there. The points have just been missing. To be fair, Alpine only just scored its first points this weekend. I think that's what we're going to see. A very set of Australian predictions, but I'm happy to hear it.
Fly the flag.
Yes, and with that note, that's all the time we have for Pit Talk this week. You can subscribe to Pit Talk wherever you get your favourite podcasts, and you can leave us a rating and a review as well. And of course, you can see us on YouTube if you haven't already. If you're listening to this and you want to see what it looked like, well, you can go and find out. This weekend is the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. It's at 3 a.m. Eastern Time. You can keep up to date with all the latest F1 news at foxsports.com.au. From Matt Clayton and me, Michael Lamonato, we'll catch you next week.